Good morning, South Africa. My name is Solly Malatsi. I'm the DA's Shadow Minister of Communications. Today, the DA introduces its social impact bill to remove race-based criteria from all government procurement processes. Thousands of businesses are suffering at the hands of the ANC's race-based policies that continue to favor ANC cronies and exclude millions of South Africans. To introduce this bill, I'm joined by my colleagues, Dean Macpherson, who's the party's Shadow Minister for Trade and Industry, and Gwen Ngwenya, the DA's Head of Policy. Gwen and Dean will take you through the proposed legislation, and at the end, we'll allow an opportunity for questions and answers for the media colleagues who have all connected for this broadcast. Gwen, over to you now.
Thank you very much, Solly. In 2020, the DA adopted an economic justice policy, which at its core answers the question, how can we effectively address the legacy of apartheid without perpetuating race classification, which in itself is a legacy of apartheid? We looked at the legacy as it presents itself today. Today, we see poor educational outcomes, health inequalities, and environmental degradation and pollution, particularly in areas next to mines and factories where poor communities reside. If this is how the legacy of apartheid continues to present itself today, and for which ANC government after ANC government has failed to address, then surely these are the challenges which an empowerment policy must speak to. The best way the private sector can contribute to this challenge is not by making a narrow impact to the lives of a few, but by making contributions to the challenges identified. And some already do. Why has BBBEE not made a broad-based impact as it claims? Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this question because the failures of BBBEE are now common cause. You will find few people who are willing to say that BBBEE has not been a failure. It has not enabled broad-based empowerment. Instead, what it has done is enabled elite enrichment at the expense of the majority of South Africans. BBBEE has proven itself to be an ineffective method of promoting economic inclusion. We have said before that it is rooted in the idea of trickle-down redress, where corporates are used to transfer assets, positions, and contracts from one elite to another, without in fact promoting economic inclusion. Those who tend to benefit most from BBBEE currently tend to either be politically connected, already financially well off, or they run uncompetitive businesses who provide goods and services to the state at an astronomical cost and who have little incentive to become more cost competitive. It is mistaken to think that this means that it's the government that pays more. The only money government has is the money it gets from taxpayers who are individuals and businesses. Who pays more? Taxpayers pay more. And the most vulnerable are affected because less can be delivered. Therefore, the vast majority of South Africans who are intended to benefit from BBBEE are in fact excluded from its ambit. In addition, individuals who have benefited in the past from BBBEE policies may continue to benefit repeatedly in the future, thereby defeating the upliftment goals it purports to promote. Often, it serves only to change the demographics of senior executive leaders within organizations instead of directly addressing underlying economic and social justice issues within society, such as improving education, which would allow for more people to access high-skilled jobs. Any just social upliftment policy should seek to exclude already wealthy individuals from repeatedly benefiting when submitting government tenders, as this defeats the point of the upliftment policy in the first place. So the focus really has to be on public procurement, and we remain the same focus, or we retain the same focus, in the sense that public procurement remains a relevant way to leverage change. Public procurement is a large part of government expenditure, amounting to almost R1 trillion, or approximately 22% of South Africa's GDP. As a result, public procurement presents a significant opportunity for government to address socio-economic challenges by incentivizing companies who wish to do business with the state to invest in areas which make a positive social impact. At present, government procurement is currently regulated under the South African Constitution, with Section 217 recognizing that when an organ of state contracts for goods or services, it must do so in accordance with the system, which is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. This does not, however, prevent preference in the allocation of contracts. To give effect to this constitutional provision, the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, the PPPFA, was created. Regardless of the intention of the Act, however, it has not resulted in the advancement of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. Our policy proposes retaining an element of preference in the allocation of contracts, but we want to ensure that the impact is truly broad-based. The Act allows for governments to evaluate tenders against a set of prescribed criteria. Currently, tenders above a certain threshold receive 90 points or 80 points based on price submitted by the tenderer, with 10 points or 20 points allocated based on BBBEE status. BBBEE and the PPPFA have failed to leverage procurement as a tool to address the legacy of unfair discrimination, which affected access to education, it affected healthcare, jobs, and it drove spatial and economic inequality. At present, if a company makes a contribution to any one of these areas, it would not be recognized at all, or it would receive minimal recognition under the current scorecard. By replacing BBBEE with recognition of the private contributions that companies make to sustainable development goals, then the PPPFA will enable us to address the underlying causes of inequality of opportunity, and benefits will not accrue to individuals who do not need them. In addition, the overwhelming beneficiaries of contributions to the SDGs would remain Black South Africans, as they continue to be the most affected by the deprivations which the SDGs track. The SDGs are a globally recognized set of socio-economic indicators which seek to promote economic inclusion. Scoring companies in part based on their SDG contribution or their social impact is not simply another burden on business. The way it differs in this regard is that the SDGs are an internationally recognized framework, so every stakeholder can identify and address the goals they are best fit to address, taking into consideration factors such as the company value chain and their business model. This is what we mean by a whole of society approach. In addition, companies will experience this huge potential to drive returns by using this model, as investors, shareholders, and analysts look for companies with strong SDG awareness and commitments when making their investments. To talk more on how the bill itself would play out in practice and pick up from this policy approach that I have described, I would like to hand over to our Shadow Minister of Trade and Industry, Dean Macpherson.
Thanks so much, Gwen, and thanks, Solly. Just want to say how really exciting this moment and opportunity is for the DA to be at the forefront of introducing legislation that is going to truly see wide and broad-based empowerment and ensure that money that is used for procurement by the state is leveraged in a cost-competitive way, and that South Africa gets value for money, and that we're able to create jobs and build society as a whole. So the DA intends to introduce a bill which will amend the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. This bill will be referred technically as the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Amendment Bill, but we will in public be informally calling it the Social Impact Bill. This bill will give a rise and effect to the DA's economic justice policy, which seeks to address the root causes of inequality of opportunity across South Africa. Our bill will remove BBBEE consideration and will replace it with a company's contributions towards a variety of different sustainable development goals. However, the most important factor for government procurement will remain price and functionality. This is because the capability to execute and at the lowest cost will benefit those who are most reliant on government services and in turn lead to the greatest upliftment of society as a whole. The DA will seek to amend Section 21B1 and 2, as well as Section 21D of the PPPFA, in order to recognize companies which make the most positive socio-economic impact as measured by a variety of development goals instead of crude BBBEEE. A social impact index or score can easily replace the existing BBBEE scorecard, with the benefit of those contributions will be comprehensive and get to those that need it the most, whereas the current model only benefits a few and entrenches inequality and poverty. There's a variety of benefits to using our model over BBBEE, and these include that the social impact targets will target currently vulnerable and disadvantaged South Africans, whereas current legislation targets and uplifts elites and entrenches the status quo. Our model will make it more difficult for benefits to accrue to those who they were not intended for, whereas existing legislation only entrenches patronage. Our model includes 17 goals which are internationally recognized, which, if achieved, will result in a vastly inclusive and more sustainable society, whereas existing legislation contains narrow criteria that fails to account for the underlying causes of social and economic exclusion. Our model, as I said, is also globally recognized and is increasingly international best practice to assist with reporting, whereas existing legislation is highly localized, very complex, and not internationally accepted. Our model will also encourage investment in companies that have strong social development awareness and commitments, whereas the current legislation tends to encourage investment both locally and most certainly internationally. We know this because the EU itself has said that BBBEE is one of the biggest impediments to international investment. It's also important to recognize, while the achievement of these goals is important, it is necessary to articulate priorities. Companies would be encouraged to set their own priorities in line with the areas that they have the most impact on, taking into consideration factors such as sectoral priorities, the company's value chain, and their business model. When companies contribute to development goals, they are most relevant to their operating environment. They will be directly addressing the drivers of poverty and inequality within society. This is a fundamentally different approach to the current scorecard system, as the SDG model does not rely on trickle-down redress to broader society, but instead directly addresses the social and economic improvements required to enhance a quality of life for all South Africans. On the way forward, the DA has submitted to the Parliamentary Legal Services a notice of intention to introduce a private member's bill and invitation for comment. This will be published in the Government Gazette within a few weeks. The public and all interested parties will be invited to submit their comments to our bill. And as a political party and myself, we will be engaging everyone from ordinary South Africans to big and small businesses, because we want to bring as many people and organizations on board on this journey. We will then evaluate these comments and subsequently submit our social impact bill to Parliament shortly afterwards. And we really want to encourage the public to be involved in this process. We have really a once-in-a-generation opportunity now to effect real economic change, to see broad empowerment entrenched in South Africa, and to bring business on board in a way that they've never been brought on before. Instead of just transferring assets from one group of elites to another, we're going to create a framework that allows more people to be empowered using the massive preferential procurement that government does every single year as a lever and driver for economic change. So thank you very much, Solly, and thank you very much, Gwen.
Thank you very much, colleagues. There's no doubt that this bill will introduce a form model that will be able to broaden opportunities for empowerment, which is much more transparent and practical for businesses. And we have received questions from Zoom from our media colleagues. So the first two questions will be for you, Dean, and then the other two questions will be for Gwen. The first question is, why are the Sustainable Development Goals superior to BBBEEE as a criteria? Secondly, how will the SDGs prevent corruption and patronage? And for you, Gwen, what has been the underlying reason for failure in BBBEEE in South Africa to achieve its goals? And why is the DA focusing on public procurement as a mechanism to begin implementing its economic justice policy? Thank you.
So, Solly, I think that those are two good questions. Well, firstly, the SDG goals, or as we will call them, social impact goals, are more superior because they target where the need actually is. And just as an example, some of those goals relate to clean water and sanitation, quality education, quality healthcare, industrial innovation, climate action. So when we have businesses that are investing in those key priorities, that is where the most impact for ordinary South Africans can be felt. If we can invest in quality education, more South Africans will have more opportunities in jobs. If we have a healthier population because we have businesses that are investing in public health care, that is going to benefit South Africans more. But when we have the current setup and the current arrangement, which was done many decades ago, it's essentially a transfer of ownership and control from one group of elites to another to maintain a status quo, and that is just simply not acceptable. And we see the same group of people and the same politically connected cadres and comrades being enriched over and over and over again. And so when we have a transparent and direct ability to invest and to see those goals met, that's how we're going to be able to cut out the corruption and patronage, because it's more transparent and it's less focus on transferring assets from one group of elites to another.
Cool. And Gwen, did you get those two questions?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Solly. I mean, the first question was, why has BBBEEE in effect failed to be broad-based and inclusive? I mean, the simple reason for this is that it was never really designed to be, although the name suggests it was intended to be sold that way. The reason it does is that it looks at narrow criteria. It does not look at the broad historical apartheid legacy. We went through today the legacy of apartheid includes things like poor educational outcomes, which is why we have the legacy of the current education or the school system that we have that continues to produce poor educational outcomes, particularly for people in townships and rural areas. It was a system that we still feel today where there are gross health inequalities, there are spatial inequalities, etc. And yet, what does the policy of BBBEEE have to say about any of those things? It says nothing. It's completely silent on those areas which are the real legacy of apartheid today. And some might say that, well, it was never meant to address those things. It was only ever meant to address ownership and management control. Well, that is precisely why then its ambit is far too narrow and has only served to perpetuate the interests of the elite. What a proper empowerment policy would do would to target empowerment at the areas that we have looked at, which leads us really well into the second question of why procurement? Why use this as the first sort of tool in our arsenal to address economic empowerment? Well, procurement really is one of the best ways in which you really have a nexus or intersection between government, financing, governments making transactions, and broader private sector and broader companies. And so what that enables us to do is to leverage the vast amount of resources and transactions which center around government procurement, and use that as a way to incentivize businesses, who, by the way, many already do, to focus on areas which really would make a broad-based economic impact. So if a business transfers half of its shares to a BBBEE partner, that benefits potentially one or a few, or a few select individuals. If a business instead decides to, part of its CSI or its social impact goals, etc., decides that it is going to contribute to energy efficiency in the country, it might decide that it's going to sponsor bursaries in education, etc. Whatever the goals that it feels fit best and complement best its particular value chain and business model, those incentives, or those rather interventions, are going to impact the lives of far more people than BBBEE ever intended, or in fact does do in practice.
Thanks, Gwen, and also to you, Dean, for those responses. There's no doubt that this is part of the DA's groundbreaking legislative interventions in order to make sure that, empowerment becomes credible, that it is transparent, and that it can also drive the reform that we need in our economy and to create jobs. So thanks everyone who has joined us on all our social media platforms, and to our media colleagues who have taken the time to connect to this press conference. Just two things from my side. Dean will be available for the interviews following this press conference, so you can make contact with our media team to set up those individual requests for interviews. And thank you everyone who has joined part of this broadcast, and have a good day. Thank you very much.